Karen called 911 to evict me, but what she did not know was that I was not only the legal owner of the property, but also a law enforcement officer who had spent more than a decade dealing with entitled neighbors, squatters, and petty disputes, yet nothing compared to the storm that was Karen, who had moved into the neighborhood with an air of authority as if she owned the entire block, and believed that everyone else existed to follow her rules. She was the president of the HOA, a self-appointed guardian of what she called community standards, and from the day I moved in, she made it her mission to make my life miserable. She complained about the color of my mailbox. She claimed my fence was 2 inches too tall. She said my truck was an eyesore and that my dog barked too loudly. Even though half the neighborhood had dogs, she would come to my property uninvited, taking pictures, writing reports, and sending me threatening letters signed by her, but with no legal force. She was a one-woman wrecking ball, powered by entitlement and a craving for control for weeks. I ignored her harassment, thinking she would tire out. When she realized I would not bend to her whims, but instead she escalated one afternoon as I was working in my garage. She marched up with her usual sour expression and declared that I had 24 hours to vacate the property because, according to her, the HOA had voted that my presence was not in alignment with community values. I laughed, thinking it was just another one of her empty threats, but the next morning, flashing red and blue lights showed up at my gate. 2 patrol cars rolled in with sirens off but lights swirling, and Karen trailing right behind them like she was the queen leading her army. She had actually called 911, claiming that a trespasser was living illegally on what she described as abandoned property. She pointed at me with a triumphant grin and told the officers to remove me immediately. The officers looked confused and asked for my ID, which I calmly handed over along with my deed to the property. And then, when they asked for clarification, I pulled out my badge, the same badge I had earned after years of service, the same badge that made it clear I was not just some helpless homeowner, but a sworn officer of the law. The look on Karen's face drained from smug confidence to pale shock as the officers quickly realized she had made a false police report, wasting emergency resources and attempting to weaponize law enforcement against a legal homeowner. I turned to Karen and explained to her that making false reports to 911 was a crime that carried heavy consequences, and that as a serving officer, I was well within my authority to place her under arrest for filing a false emergency report interfering with property rights and harassment. She sputtered, trying to talk her way out of it, saying she was just enforcing community rules. But there are no community rules that override the law, and there are no HOA bylaws that can evict someone from property they own outright. I informed her she was under arrest, and the officers who had arrived to back her up instead became my witnesses as I placed her in handcuffs right there on the edge of my driveway. Her cries turned from arrogant orders to desperate pleas as she begged me not to ruin her life. She said she was only trying to maintain the neighborhood, but what she had really been doing was bullying neighbors into submission, abusing authority she never truly had, and now that arrogance had led her directly into legal consequences. I read her rights, placed her in the back of squad car, and filed the report while neighbors gathered around whispering in disbelief because they had all been victims of her tyranny at some point. She had fined kids for chalk drawings on sidewalks. She had demanded elderly residents repaint their homes because the shade of white was not up to her standards. She had even tried to stop a family from building a wheelchair ramp, claiming it ruined the look of the street. People were tired of her, yet few had dared stand up to her until she crossed the wrong person. And now she would face not just embarrassment, but charges in court. Following weeks, as her case moved forward, the neighborhood finally experienced peace. She resigned from the HOA after being formally removed by unanimous vote. Her reign of entitlement was over, and residents slowly began repairing the damage she had caused. They started holding friendly block gatherings, planting gardens, and helping one another without fear of being written up or fined. And as for me, I kept living on my property in peace. My dog ran free, my truck sat proudly in the driveway, my fence stayed the height I wanted, and every time I passed by neighbors they would smile and nod, thankful that the badge I carried was not just for show, but for protecting people from those who abused power. Not all criminals wear masks and sneak in the night. Some wear polite smiles and hold clipboards pretending to care about rules when really they crave control. But Karen learned the hard way that no amount of false authority stands when the real law shows up, and in the end justice was not just served, it was lived every day as the community reclaimed its freedom from her grip. She thought she could call 911 to evict me, but instead she called the very system that put her behind bars, and with my own badge I ended her reign once and for all, and that day became the turning point for our neighborhood, proving that bullies eventually face justice when someone has the courage to stand tall and fight back.